All right, the Maimon we're going to learn this morning, or at least part of it, was delivered by the Rebbe on the Shabbos Parshas Terumah. The year was Tafshin Mem Gimel, equivalent to 1983. And it's based on an opening verse in the Parsha. It's kind of like a roundup verse. The Parsha opens up by talking about God asking the Jewish people for donations, and then there's a roundup verse, and the roundup verse says, "Va'asuli Mikdash." This is what it's all about. You're going to make for me a Mikdash, v'shachanti b'seichem, and I will dwell amongst them. Ve'amr Razal. So in this Maimer, the Rebbe zeroes in on a statement which our sages make, which is found in the Medrash Shmuel and in the Vayikra Rabbah. Kol makom shenemar li, wherever it says the word li, lamed yud, einei zaz li'elam, then that is never going to budge. If it says li, it's there for eternity. Lo be'elam haza, v'lo be'elam haba. Now obviously the truth of Torah is always true, and nothing changes the truth. However, there are certain details in Torah which one could argue at periods of time do not have relevance in the technical, actual, real-time realm. So whatever, that's true conceptually, but it remains on a conceptual level. But if it says li, that's a different story. Einizaz. If it says li, you can bet your bottom dollar it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be relevant. It's always going to be meaningful. And after all, it does say, "Va'asu li Mikdash." And that has got to be one of the most surprising statements in the entirety of Chazal. Because we all know that the Beis HaMikdash doesn't physically exist today. Like, v'tzarich lahavan. This really requires elucidation. As is aired in a Maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe of 1948, he says, Harei HaMikdash, after all the Mikdash, Hainu Mishkan, that is the Mishkan, Va'asuli Mikdash, Mishkan, Mikdash, the words are interchangeable. Mishkan is Ikri Mikdash. After all, the Gemara in Eruvin tells us that sometimes the Gemara uses the word Mishkan, and sometimes, the Torah, the scripture, will use Mishkan or sometimes Mikdash, but they're not two separate things. So it says here, Va'asuli Mikdash. And the very fact that it has two names is indicative of the notion of Hayu Beishinuyim. There were differences. There's the Mishkan, and then there's the Mikdash, and they're not the same. And the Mikdash Sha'asa Shlema, Solomon's temple, Va'abayis Hasheni, and the second Beis HaMikdash, Shneihem Nechrevu, were both destroyed. It's not a secret. The Hainu, that is to say, the Leizu Bavad, Shahayu Bem Shinuyim. Not only were there some kind of changes, not only does the Mishkan shift from being a temporary tabernacle to a building made of stone with a permanent location, but this is like a shocking statement. We know that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, razed to the ground. In the first Beis HaMikdash, there's still some foundations left. The second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed to the point we don't even know with certainty where the Beis HaMikdash stood. We have the approximate location. We don't even know with certainty where it was. So, how do you square that with the notion of li? That's it. If it says li, you're good. Einizaz. It's never changing. This is ever changing, not never changing. Eich nemar. How can it be said that einizaz, that it doesn't move, it doesn't budge? La'olam, for eternity. So the Rebbe that Tzemach Tzedek sets out to explain this very conundrum in his Memorim that are printed in Eretz Torah, and he says that there's this maxim which is found in the writings of our sages, that Mikdash ha'elyon mechubar mamesh leMikdash ha'tachten, that the heavenly temple is parallel and linked, tethered to the earthly temple. Uke'inyan, this is along the ideas that are articulated by David HaMelech in Psalm 122, where there King David says, Yerushalayim habenuya, Jerusalem in its built-up state, Ki'ir shechubra lo yachtav. That's like a city of total unity, which means more than there wasn't supposed to be a wall going through dividing the city of Yerushalayim. But it means Yerushalayim shel Maila mechubar im Yerushalayim shel Mata. As the Gemara in Masechet Taina says on page 5, that this means that the earthly Jerusalem is never sundered or separated from the heavenly Jerusalem. The heavenly reality and the earthly reality always remain conjoined. They always remain attached. So, along those lines, the Tzemach Tzedek suggests that that's the meaning of Ein Zaz Le'olam. Yerushalayim doesn't change. The heavenly Yerushalayim remains ever mirrored and in parallel to the earthly Yerushalayim. The heavenly Mikdash would also remain always parallel to the earthly Mikdash. So what happens when the earthly Mikdash moves? Okay, then the heavenly Mikdash moves. But Ein Zaz. There's never a separation for a moment. The heavenly temple is always tethered or linked to whatever kind of remnants of a temple will be left in Olam Hazeh, in this material world. And that is to say that once the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, that the heavenly Beis HaMikdash remains tethered to the site of where the earthly Beis HaMikdash was. As the Rebbe many times used to say, that the Beis HaMikdash doesn't exist, and then he would carefully add the word begashmius. It doesn't exist materially, it exists spiritually. So why do we go to the Kotel if it exists spiritually? Because it remains tethered. It remains tethered. It's almost like a grave. It's like a body remains, a soul remains tethered to a body. It remains tethered. The heavenly Beis HaMikdash always remains connected, and that means Ein Zaz. And because of that, Meir Gam Achshav Beruchnius. Therefore, on a spiritual level, the Beis HaMikdash continues to function as before. It resonates with a certain holiness. That's why we face the Beis HaMikdash when we pray. That's why we face the Beis HaMikdash when we memorialize our dead. And just about every other thing of sanctity and importance we do, we're facing the Beis HaMikdash. That's because there, in that site, there's a direct link and a resonation of the Mikdash HaElyon. So the Rebbe now comments on this clarification of a seeming intractable statement of our sages of Ein Zaz Le'olam, that the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, is there for eternity and never budges and seemingly never changes. The Rebbe says, this would then be connected to the spiritual Beis HaMikdash. This is a spiritual concept. What does that have to do with the physical Beis HaMikdash? The physical, material, terrestrial commandment that we received of va'asу Mikdash. That's not a spiritual thing. That's not a heavenly thing. That's an earthly thing. We were commanded to make it earthly Beis HaMikdash. Craft it, make it. Va'asу. And then we say, Ein Zaz. It's not going to move. So noting this issue, and it is an issue, can't ignore it. Okay? You explain it away that it has relevance on a spiritual realm. Yeah, but the mitzvah wasn't given on a spiritual realm. The mitzvah was given on an earthly plane. So the Rebbe says something very interesting. Maybe this is the reason. Maybe Tzemach Tzedek curiously brings another very different explanation in the same maamer. So typically, the maamorim of Chassidus can have different explanations, different approaches. But the same maamer will not bring conflicting biurim, usually. The same maamer will follow a theme. The way the maamer of Chassidus are designed, they usually take a theme and develop it in the fullest sense so we should be able to understand it. There's no little jingles in Chassidus Chabad. Chassidus Chabad, everything is like you have to look deeply into it and understand it, and there's a profundity and there's a depth. So in the profundity and depth that's being spoken of here, we see that the maamer advances in a concept. Ein Zaz. Ein Zaz means that Yerushalayim Shel Maila is mechubet Yerushalayim Shel Mata. And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, takes it and says, aha, you see, if Yerushalayim is heavenly Jerusalem is tethered to earthly Jerusalem. So then taking that into its natural progression, the heavenly Beis HaMikdash remains tethered to its earthly iteration, the site of the Beis HaMikdash, which is a chiddush, I believe, of the Tzemach Tzedek, that the idea of Yerushalayim Shel Maila and Mata, that the heavenly notion of Jerusalem and earthly notion of Jerusalem and their continued connection also expresses itself within the confines of Mikdash, of the actual Beis HaMikdash. Not only is there a heavenly Jerusalem, there's also a heavenly Beis HaMikdash, and that heavenly Beis HaMikdash remains connected to the earthly Beis HaMikdash. And you would think that Tzemach Tzedek would develop this idea, but very interestingly, in the same maamer, he introduces a very different approach. A totally different approach, because the first approach remains geographically central to Yerushalayim. It's Yerushalayim, Shomayla. Yerushalayim is a geographic area. The Beis HaMikdash is a geographic site. So it's very much Mishkan, Mikdash, Jerusalem focused. But the second answer that Tzemach Tzedek gives has nothing to do per se with Yerushalayim, it seems. It's a totally disparate approach. Different. Shivim Panim Oteda. But the Pella, the strange thing is that they're in the same Maimer. And that is, Al Bir, another Bir, Al Pi Mashen is Boyer, based on what's written, and this is a pasuk in Yecheskel, that it says, Ve'eh Yelahem leMikdash Ma'at. God says, through his prophet Ezekiel, about the Galut, the exilic reality of the Jewish people and their continued relationship with God. So God says, I will be for them as a minor sanctuary. Va'amru Razal, and the Gemara says, near the end of Masechet Megillah on page 29, Elo bati knesiyos ubati medrashos. This is a direct reference to houses of prayer and to houses of Torah study. That is to say, synagogues and institutions of learning. Hainu, b'chol morken, in every place. Gam bizman hagolos, even during times of exilic dispersion, even when we are totally disconnected from the geography of the Holy Land, and for centuries we were. Hine, habati knesiyos ubati medrashos. So behold, these houses of holiness, in which the Jewish people worship and fulfill the sacred mitzvah of studying Torah, he Mikdash Ma'at. They are a minor sanctuary. In other words, that becomes your Beis HaMikdash. And that's Ein Zaz Le'olam. That never changes. Wherever Jewish people have lived, there has always been synagogues, there's always been yeshivot. And if there are only synagogues, then we're in big trouble. We didn't last. There needs to be not only a bayit shemegadlim bo Torah, not only a place where we increase and emphasize the notion of study, of prayer, but also a bayit shemegadlim bo Torah as well. It's Torah and Tefillah. So bati knesiyos and bati midrashos. And we have always had houses like this. And we have never stopped having areas designated for worship. And because of this, God remains with the Jewish people for eternity in a microcosmic way. Not in the large, overarching Beis HaMikdash concept, a global spiritual center, but a local center, a neighborhood center, a block center, a city center, a country center, the different centers, but it becomes a center nonetheless. That is to say, the Mikivan she'eni zaz mirushalayim shel mayla, because God's presence doesn't go or doesn't remove itself from the heavenly Jerusalem, lachein gam le'zaz mirushalayim shel mata. Therefore, God's presence won't move from the concept of shechina, of dwelling, of presence in this world. The gam ka'asher hoya hachurban, ba'efen the kiluch hamosri ala eitzim v'alavonim, that even in such time, where God poured his fury, or vented his fury on stone and on wood, and thusly sparing the Jewish people, nishar gama beis hamikdash shalomata, nonetheless, even though the wood and the stone had fury poured and vented upon them, something was left. And these are the bati knesiyos or bati midrashos. That's the Mikdash Ma'at. So really and truly, if you think about it, it's unusual for the Tzemach Tzedek to bring two very different kind of biurim. They're biurim, their explanations, very different kind of biurim. It's brought in the same Maimer. And the Rebbe is suggesting the reason it's brought in the same Maimer is because the first biur cannot adequately explain the question. It doesn't. Even if you develop this in its fullest sense, even if you appreciate the notion of a heavenly Jerusalem tethered to an earthly Jerusalem, and even if you translate that into the frame and confine of Mikdash Shomayla and Mikdash Shomata, in the end, there isn't anything here physically. There's a place where something was, but it's not here. So it's a spiritual concept. If it's a spiritual concept, what difference does it make to geography? What does it have to do with the material world? So therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek adds. He buttresses the first approach with the second, as if to say, it's almost as if you cannot have one without the other. It's only when you have both of the explanations together that you're able to understand the business of Ein Zaz Le'olam. This is maybe like the Rebbe says in many of his Rashi Sichos, that the reason that Rashi will bring two answers, even though there's it could be multiple answers, it could be 10 answers to something that I found in Chazal, but Rashi will bring two, for example, and sometimes on a rare occasion even 3 answers, is because each one of these answers is profoundly problematic from a perspective of Pshuta Shel Mikra, of the straightforward meaning. And because each answer is problematic and each answer doesn't adequately, fully give a satisfying answer, so then Rashi has no choice but to give you kind of a conjunctive interpretation that quotes multiple answers, because the only way you're going to understand this is with multiple viewpoints that are being employed at the same time. And the Rebbe seems to be saying here that the only way, the reason that Tzemach Tzedek quotes two very different explanations in the Maimer is because the only way that we'll really be able to understand or appreciate the idea of Eini Zaz is only when we have both the explanations together. Now something very interesting happens in this Maimer. Now the Rebbe begins to talk about the concept of Beis HaMikdash altogether. What does it mean? Who needs a Beis HaMikdash? And I'm going to put it out there that l'chayda, what does that have to do with the first section of the Maimer about the Eini Zaz La'olam, which has two explanations in the Maimer of Tzemach Tzedek, which the Rebbe suggests are required because each is incomplete without the other. And then he goes off seemingly in a different direction. But if you think about it carefully, really it is in a different direction, and we'll soon see. Nevertheless, tzarich lahav, we need to understand mahu achidush. What is the novelty here? Shebe'inyan hamigdash, that with regard to the Beis HaMikdash, sheboy yeshna hashras hashchina. What is this about? What is this notion of a Beis HaMikdash? Oh, sure, yeah, that's the place where God dwells. God dwells. V'harei ksiv. Is it not written after all? Es hashamayim v'sa'aretz ani molei. Heaven and earth, yeah, I'm there, as God says. In fact, elsewhere it's written that all of this is within divinity. Hainu. But even besides the fact that it's all within divinity, God even says, I fill these places. My presence is in all these places. There isn't a crevice of the material reality in which God's presence does not dwell in its fullness, is not there in its fullness. Ani molei. Hainu. The divinity is everywhere. Not only the level of divinity that we could say, it says mole. Mole means it fills. So mole means bechinas mimala kol. That's a level of divinity that engages with each level of creation according to its level. But really, it goes beyond that. Elegam bechinas ani, which ani in Chassidus generally refers to the atmospheric reality of God, the overwhelming reality of God that is far greater than creation, that equates all of creation and doesn't address its individual or distinct realities or frames of existence. So you have Seviv Kalaman, and higher than Seviv Kalaman, and it's everywhere. So in that case, what do you need a Beis HaMikdash for? What's the novelty? So Mazel Tov, we got a Beis HaMikdash. What? He wasn't here before? Don't worry, this is irrevocable. This shall remain for eternity. The Mishkan is always going to be here. The Mishkan is Eini Zaz. I said, what's Eini Zaz? It was always here. What happened? What changed? You say, there's a change, and this change is never going to be undone. I didn't even know what the change was. God is not everywhere. And even if one will try to stretch and say, yes, God is everywhere. But God is everywhere because God chooses to be everywhere. That has nothing to do with your choice. God wishes to be here because you chose to bring him in. The Kotzker Rebbe once came into shul. He was a very sharp man, and he started to pound on the bima. And they said, Rebbe, what is it? He said, where is God? He said. And they said, what do you mean, Rebbe? You're a holy man. You're asking us where God is? You're a teacher of a master of Chassidus? What do you mean? God, every child knows Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is everywhere. So the Kotzker Rebbe said, no. God is where you let him in. God's where you let. So God is everywhere. That's from God's perspective. How about from our perspective? Say, God, thank you very much. We got no room for you here. There's this. In antiquity, it was called a bumper sticker. Now it's called a meme on Facebook. Going around, it says, people say, how could God let this happen in the schools? And the response is, God responds, you haven't allowed me into the school for about 30 years now. You have to let God in. You have to make God part of your life. Of course, God is everywhere. Do you open your mind to God? Do you open your heart to God? Do you let God in? That's the question. So even if you want to say that you need to have Avodas Adam, it's okay, fine. Okay, I get it. You have to let God in. So what do I need the business of Asli Mikdash? What do I have to build a base of Mikdash for? You want to let God in? Put on tefillin, learn Torah, light Shabbos candles, put up mezuzahs, eat kosher, let God in. Live a life that's mindful of God. The thing is, the Achidish, the Beis HaMikdash, the novelty of Beis HaMikdash is Sheti Ashras HaShechina Begilui B'Makim Mesuyam. This is in the 53rd chapter, the end of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe finishes off the book by speaking about the notion of the Shechina, and he says that it needs to be in a specific place, and he gives us a metaphor. Just like the soul, which becomes enclosed in the body. Harei HaNefesh Etzem Pashut. The nefesh itself is not the power to hear, see, digest, or coordinate. The nefesh itself is life. And all of the body's alive. One cannot argue that the brain is more alive than the toes. Live is live. Dead is dead. The person is alive. The oisa nefesh, it's the same life. It's the same live. Like we talked about many times, the rats don't come to chew on the toes in the middle of the night, but they will come to chew on a corpse. Why? Why? Because they're afraid of life, because there's a pulsating nature of life. And life is in the entire body equally. And afal pike, nonetheless, God created a person. Where is the nefesh seen? Where is the center of human consciousness? The brain. And from there it goes to the whole body. And actually, with everything we know scientifically today, that's how it works really. The brain is the control center, and there are nerves that spread through the vertebrae throughout the whole body. This metaphor is also invoked to explain the notion of Mikdash, that the presence of Hashem resonates there openly. So God's presence, like the neshama is seen in the brain openly in consciousness, God's presence then spreads throughout the whole body. The body meaning, in the metaphor, the world. So what does this have to do with the first part of the Maimer? What's it to do with the first part of the Maimer? First part of the Maimer is that to say that it's Yerushalayim-centric or geography-related is not good enough. We need to have this other interpretation, the other idea that God, telling us to build a Mishkan and a Mikdash, later on evolves, as Prophet Ezekiel says, into our minor sanctuaries, synagogues, house of study. Then the Rebbe comes to the whole business of Gilui, of revelation, but he just finished saying in the first paragraph that we don't have revelation today. So what did the Rebbe try to answer? How is he furthering the explanation? So the first answer is, I don't know. I don't know. I'm presuming that everything here is written, it's accurate, even though it's an unedited, manuscript of the listeners.
The brain.
The Mishkan, the Mikdash is the brain. But here's what I think that Rebbe is trying to say. I think that the point of this Maimer is that even though we have two explanations, one profoundly centralized, Yerushalayim, Mikdash, the site of Jerusalem. The second, the Bati Knesses and Bati Midrashas, but nonetheless, even in a minor way, just as the Shechina is found openly, or through the brain, through the Beis HaMikdash, the Shechina comes to the whole world, so too, in today's day and age, the Shechina comes to every locale through the Beis HaKnesses and Beis HaMedrash. I think this is like a transformer. You have the power center. The power center is Yerushalayim. I think that every shul, every Beis HaMedrash, every Beis Chabad is basically a transformer that connects to that central. And even the transformer also acts in a central way, because transformers power a particular area. Maybe this is like it says, like Amsha Basadas. People didn't make it to shul; they can't come. Okay, they're in the fields. They're fulfilling their mitzvah because people are in shul davening. In other words, l'cha'ira, it would seem that the Rebbe is trying to suggest that this notion. Both explanations, both Yerushalayim remaining the ground zero of Jewish spirituality, and the idea that Bati Knesses and Bati Midrashas are also a fulfillment of Asli Mikdash, and therefore, because this is Eini Zaz, if it's Eini Zaz, it doesn't change, then if the Beis HaMikdash's purpose is to serve as a diffusion point of divinity, of Shechina, then so would l'cha'ira, it would seemingly have to be, even with our Beis HaMikdash and Beis HaKnesses, that it serves as a minor diffusion point for the area that it serves. I mean, this is just... I'm trying to understand why the Rebbe goes from part one of the Maimer into part two of the Maimer. I don't know. I don't know if this observation is correct, But if it is, then it's very compelling. If it is, it's very compelling because the Rebbe essentially has sewn together. He said in the first part of the Maimon that Tzemach Tzedek needs both ideas, because each idea is lackluster. One idea doesn't have the other. But the Rebbe, essentially, the second part then, has shown how the two ideas work in tandem. Both ideas, the geography idea of Yerushalayim and the Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMikdash, individual neighborhood idea, both are able to operate in unison, even in unanimity, and both bespeak and represent the same spiritual concept unfolded on earth. Anyway, that's the first two parts of the Maimer. In the third part of the Maimer, the Rebbe gets very personal, takes this all home, and he translates this into our own life. He shows you how you have it based on Mikdash in your own life, actually, in your own personal reality. And then, in the fourth and concluding part of the Maimer, which you're not going to get to the third and fourth parts, the Rebbe says that this whole idea ultimately is still very much in a spiritual way, but he says by us discussing it and talking about it and learning about it, that our hope and prayer is that we actualize the themes and the essence of the Mikdash into the reality of the future with the coming of Mashiach, B'mheira, U'b'yameinu, Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining us all week.